A sort of addendum to yesterday. Three things occurred to me today, just as I was pulling in for the evening. Two things popped on my phone. One piece from, I think it was, I think it's the DNC, DNNC, or whatever they're called, saying Ken Burns says this about that. Wow. And then Obama says this is the two separate texts on my phone. And I had been listening the day before to somebody I like listening to. I like listening very much to Norman Finkelstein, with whom I often disagree, mostly because he is I would say this, he's limited, and we all should acknowledge our limits. He is limited in the sense that he is a huge snob. He's an elitist in the highest degree. And the fact that I like him as much as I do, despite that elitism, is not a credit to him. It probably is a credit to me, but it doesn't say anything about it. He said things like, the Black Panthers were small fry, basically, in the history of revolution and progression, and that's certainly not my impression. But I would not be surprised if he would attach that to the fact that they didn't go either to college, or they certainly didn't go to direct college, because that's the thing that he trusts. Anyway, we're listening to, but that's a nice thing to sit down like Brianna Joy Gray does with Norman Finkelstein and have a good old humorous back and forth and bash at him. This thing about Ken Burns, I'd come across him by accident. There was some biography thing or interview on PBS, and he was talking about the founding of the country. And on that subject, I think the conventional wisdom is absolute tosh. I think it's almost impossible certainly for me to laud a community of, what were they, 53 of them, 53 white men who said things like all men are created equal while they were in the throes of exterminating in several peoples, an entire, if you want, race of peoples, and enslaving another. I can't take that seriously. Which is not to say that I'm right and somebody else is wrong, but it's somebody should present these people with an argument. And that is my problem with this idea of saying, well, they're perfectly great, and it's not so much that they're great or not great, but it's when us as a population, as a civilization or as a nation, look for guidance and expertise, we go to these people. And we don't go to Cesar Chavez, who graduated from high school. We don't go to James Baldwin, we should, who graduated from high school, that was it. We go to rich people or people of tremendous, and we do that in a way that is slavish and stupid. And, Barack Obama is a very, very versatile speaker of very little interest. He's skilled at speaking, and I think that that's a great gift, and I adore Obama. I really do. I think he's a very interesting person, great story, great star, great success, wonderful sense of humor, and his heart's in the right place. My problem is that in terms of wisdom, it seems to me that what has happened culturally for thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, is that you have people who learn to express themselves gradually over their lifetime. Because expressing oneself, a personal truth, not one's truth, I don't want to get into those sort of slogans, but a personal truth, an understanding of the self, and expressing that, you really becoming tremendously, tremendously valuable. And that takes time and it takes practice. It takes an engagement, a commitment to communicating with other people. There are some people that we would say there are marvelous poets who were great poets very young. I wish that John Keats had lived longer. I think Ode to a Nightingale is a marvelous poem. I think he would have done better had he lived longer. But we have this tendency, especially with education, is that we co-opt that process, that slow, practiced, grinding process of discovering the self and then learning to express it for glibness. We make the mistake of thinking, I was talking to my brother earlier today, and I do have a sensation or a feeling about my high school years, which ended at 16. I barely graduated. I found out later, but I did very well at high school and I got out as quickly as possible. But I was aware that they were sort of golden years. They were marvelous times. My teens really were consumed in middle school and high school, and it was a wonderful experience of being that, in that time. And so much happens, and then I left high school knowing how to read, having read quite a bit, knowing how to do the important things in life, and then I went out into the world to discover the world and myself at the same time. And when I hear people speak, those are the people that I find valuable. What I find with the educated, the rich are ridiculous. Why we listen to the rich? We listen to the rich because they're rich. Dear friend of mine says that Richard Branson is actually a fascinating person. I would like to see the evidence. He has ample opportunities to give me evidence of what a fascinating person he is. You might say, well, he wouldn't do that in public because it would look like this and it would look like that. Where is the billionaire in this world who has said anything significant about what is going on in Gaza or in Congo? Or if you know of them, let me know, because they're not out there. Liam Cunningham, famous British Irish actor, and Greta and people like that. But outside of that, I'm getting this idea that the wise people in the world are sitting there going, yes, well, and I'm suspicious of them because the whole, in other words, who's your go-to? And our go-to is this mythological pyramid of wisdom. And I would have to say, given that every world leader is, 99% of the world leaders are highly educated people. Very often they're very wealthy people. Rishi Sunak is an extremely wealthy man. Do tell me that Rishi Sunak is interesting or useful in some fashion. And it's not so much because we're so leader emphasis. We emphasize we need leaders. We've got to have leaders. We're leaders. I don't happen to think so. I don't think that Zoran Mamdani is a great genius. I don't even think he's even whatever. He's a charming chap, but it is his time. In other words, the people of New York, through attrition, through real life, probably through the process of social media, have finally come to a point where they're going to say, that's the guy. That has very little to do with him. That's a philosophical point. We live in a culture that is obsessed with the one man or the one woman every now and again, but the one man, the person who's going to come along and change everything, because that's how we understand history. That's not how history works. Alexander the Great I'm a huge fan of Alexander the Great. He did it because he had an extremely well-trained army of thousands, tens of thousands of individuals who were brought to that pitch by his father. Otherwise, he would have failed. That's democracy. That's democratic thinking. Not, what does Ken Burns think?